hi guys. I'm Dr. Arjun Bopanna and we are discussing anthropological theorists. So the third theorist that we have to discuss is diffusion. This is a rapid revision class. We are not doing in much detail. We are just focusing on the essence of each of these topics. So far we have covered classical evolution. So far we have covered Franz Boas and his idea of historical particularism and cultural relativism. So now we are talking about diffusion. So we were talking about theories and we were talking about change. And classical evolutionists said that change happens because of evolution. This was criticized by diffusion school of thought, who said that change can also, or more importantly, happens not because of evolution, but more importantly, because of borrowing, because of learning something from another person, because of acculturation, because you learn things from others. And humans have always been migrating in search of resources and better way of life, not just today, but even in the ancient times. And when they spread, they took along with them their culture. And this is the basic premise of diffusion. That means culture gets invented at one place, and from there, it spreads to different parts of the world. And this is how culture spreads. And when a new society learns or borrows these cultures, then they adopt that in their societal practices, culture, and undergo change. So change happens because of diffusion. Even in your life, you might have undergone change because you have absorbed cultural elements from America, from social media, from other things, where you have absorbed their culture and inculcated that into your way of life and undergone change. So that's a basic premise of diffusion. Now, from the exam point of view, again, it's a very important topic, especially the German and American diffusion. So, according to nationality, the diffusion school of thoughts can be divided into British diffusionists, German, and the American. German or the continental diffusionists, and or they are also called as Vienna School of Diffusion, and then you have the American diffusion school. So one by one we will see it. So basically, what is diffusion? It's a process by which cultural traits are discovered. They are invented in one place or society, and then they spread directly or indirectly to other places. So that is what is diffusion. So very simple. See, now British diffusion, everybody says that culture gets invented and from there it spread. Now, British diffusionists are called as extreme diffusionists because they said that this culture invention is only one place, correct? That's what we tell that they believed that the British diffusion, culture got originated at only one place, that is Egypt, and from there it spread. There are stories. So basically, you have Smith, who goes to Egypt. He sees the magnanimous structure of the pyramids, and then he compares it with other structures across the world, and then he says that they are very poor quality or version of the pyramid, and hence it's a weak imitation. So culture must have got invented in Egypt, and from there it spread. So what is the evidence of diffusion? All of them say the evidence of diffusion is similarities. When there is similarities between two different societies, the cultural practices, it should be because of diffusion. Again, that has been criticized later. We'll see that. So similarities between two societies is an evidence of diffusion. So British diffusionists took that to a very extreme level where any similarities were considered to be evidence of diffusion, for which they are criticized. Because sometimes what happens is, if a culture should have utility, it should have a form, similarity. See, for example, wheel should be round if it has to have a function. Just because wheel is round in India and in another country doesn't mean that diffusion should have taken place. So that is the criticism of British diffusionists. So let's just see. People did not invent culture everywhere. Rather, culture gets invented at one place, and from there it spread to other places. So people are not stationary because they migrate. When they migrate, culture spreads. So British diffusionists, remember these names: J. Smith, Perry, and Rivers. Remember Rivers? Rivers came to India. He did his studies among the Thodas. He was a medical science officer, and he contributed towards genealogy. All these facts you should be able to relate. Okay, Rivers, Perry, and Smith. All of them agreed that the culture gets invented at Egypt, and from there it spread. And what is the evidence they give? Similarities. So any form of similarities between X and Egypt indicate that diffusion has occurred from Egypt to this place X. That's why they're called also as Egyptologists. They're also called as Heliolithic theory, because Egypt, the pyramids of Egypt, which was related or which were connected to other monuments, this Egypt was the worship of the sun god. So that is Helio, meaning sun. So Heliolithic, stone dedicated to stone monuments dedicated to the worship of sun. So therefore it's called as Heliolithic theory. Anyway, so it is criticized because obviously it was very biased. They did not do any much, they did not show that culture from across the world should have originated in Egypt. They could not prove that. They could not explain complex, spread of culture. They did not give any typology. They relied too much on archaeological evidences. They could not prove that every culture should have been invented in Egypt. They're very biased and all of that. And not every similarities can be proof of evidence. And they did not describe how evolution took place. So for this reason, British diffusionists is very unscientific, and today it is not accepted. And therefore, even in the examination, you don't need to worry too much on this. We will not be asked in the exam. The next is the German diffusionist. So German diffusionist is a very important diffusion school. It talks about how, culture gets invented at one place and it spreads in the form of circles. And they also say multiple centers of origin. They don't say that just one place is the origin of culture. They say there are multiple centers of origin. So they say there are multiple circles across the world. So this is one idea that you have to remember. So therefore it is also called as culture crease school of thought. Okay, culture circle or culture crease, because culture gets at one place and it spreads in the form of circles like ripples on the water. And wherever it meets, there is diffusion of culture between the two circles. So it spreads as people migrate. Okay, culture also spreads. So this is how they explain that culture spreads in the form of circle. That's why it's called as culture crease in Germany, which is culture circles. They also say multiple forms. And it's a very interesting theory because it was not very unscientific like the British diffusionists. They gave evidences, materialistic evidences to show that diffusion did take place. So you need to remember these names. These are all German diffusionists: Friedrich Ratzel, Fritz Grabner, Leo Frobenius, and Father Schmitz. So these four anthropologists are part of German diffusionists, and they all believe that we need to undertake a historical study in order to trace this circle. Okay, so we need to do historical study to understand where is the origin and how did it spread. So their task, according to them, reconstruct the various circles across the world and demonstrate diffusion and migration taking place. One more point I would like to add to this, which has to be there in your answer, is that they are not just diffusionists, they are also evolutionists. In the sense, they said that these circles were formed in strata, in layers. Let's see the picture over here. So they said that these circles that happened in different parts of the world happened in the form of, happened at different times. So we can actually arrange them in layers, in strata. So those circles, so we can actually arrange them in circles. So oldest circle and the most modern circle. So like that, they were also showing that how each culture circles came into existence at different parts of the world and also at different points of the world. So that's also something interesting that you have to keep in mind. So there are many centers of origin. Okay, they also say that as culture spreads, they undergo dilution. We need to analyze it in time and space and based on material facts. So two important, term or approach that they adopted was criteria of form and criteria of quantity. This has to be there in your answer in your exam. Now, what these things are very quickly, criteria of form is when two cultures, okay, if you have to show that there is diffusion between them, it can only happen if there is similarities in non-material culture. They came up with this criteria of form and criteria of quality. Let's just have a look at what these things are. So the criteria of form, according to them, so the criteria of form says that not all similarities are evidences of diffusion. Okay, only non-utilitarian feature, if they are similar, then it is evidence of diffusion. If you recollect British diffusion, all similarities were considered as evidence of diffusion. These guys are saying not all similarities, only those which are of non-utilitarian. If they are similar, then it is called as diffusion, or then it is evidence of diffusion. Okay, because if it is of utilitarian nature, then it will have form. It cannot be evidence of diffusion. So that is your principle of form, formen gedanke, given by Ratzel. So you need to remember the case studies that he has given in Mongolia as well as in Africa. Leo Frobenius, his student, improvises this idea of criteria of form and gives criteria of quantity, where he talks about geographical statistics. So he says that if there is more similarities in not just one cultural element but culture complex, in that case it is a higher chance or higher evidence to show that diffusion occurs. So that concept is called as the criteria of quantity. Okay, so that is what he talks about. So the two concepts, criteria of form, criteria of quantity, needs to be remembered. Criteria of quantity, Leo Frobenius. Next, you have Fritz Grabner, who talks about same culture crease. Here he says that man must have invented some basic culture, and from there he formed bands and he spread to different parts of the world, and from there other cultural elements got invented, and then again it spreads and so on. So therefore it keeps happening like this in the form of circle. So therefore, as an ethnographer, you need to do a historical and cultural study to identify the origin of culture. So this way he has studied the culture circles as well as come up with which is the oldest culture circle. So according to Fritz Grabner, he says that there are multiple development of culture, and in his study of Melanesia, he says that the oldest circle was Tasmanian, and the most youngest or the newest circle is Polynesian patrilineal culture circle. So this way, he says that, the first circle that was formed was Tasmanian, and then the next circle above it was formed was Australian boomerang, and so on and so on. So it happened in 6 circles like this. So this one is the most youngest, Polynesian, and this one is the Tasmanian. So that's how he says history has, or culture circles has evolved. So his approach is historical ethnology, because it essentially involves historical study in order to understand the origin of that particular cultural trait. Similarly, you also have Father Schmitz, who also talks about the culture circles as well as the evolution of different culture circles. And he says he not only restricts himself to Polynesia, but of the entire world. So if you look at this table, Father Schmitz talks about the culture circles in different parts of the world. So he divides the entire world into 4 grades, and in each grade he shows different circles. So for example, the Central Crease, Arctic Crease, and the Antarctic Crease are the oldest and the most primitive grade, practicing hunting and gathering. Next comes the primary grade, religion and magic. Next comes the secondary grade, and the last one being the tertiary grade. So this factual information, a little bit at least, you should remember and mention it when German diffusion is asked. So again, it has been also criticized. Critically, we can see it is very speculative to say that even though multiple center they talked about, but which is the actual origin becomes very speculative, because we need to find evidences of all these cultural origin, then it becomes very difficult. Did not understand the dynamics, too much emphasis on trait complex. Again, did not explain the dynamics of diffusion, emphasized on material culture, did not focus on non-material elements, etc. Talked about multiple development of culture, but did not elaborate each one. They talked about Tasmanian or Pygmy culture being the most oldest, but they did not give any evidence as to why it is the oldest. They assumed that diffusion occurs in circle. That means it happens in uniform manner across all direction. It's not like that. It happens in a single line or in few direction, not across. So diffusion is not uniform across. And they mainly talked about typology of diffusion, which is not very good while talking about culture change. So this is how we criticize German diffusionists. Also know the difference between German and British diffusionists. The next third diffusionist is American diffusion, influenced by Franz Boas's historical particularism, where they talk about the American diffusionists say that culture gets invented at culture center, and from there it spreads to different part. And wherever there is similarities in culture, they called it as culture area. Right, so influenced by museum methodology as well as Franz Boas, and they came up with the concept of culture area. Culture areas are where culture traits have similarities, and when we do an ethnographic study as well as study their history, we can understand the origin of these culture areas. So that is what they talk about. We have to remember Clark Whistler and Alfred Kroeber while talking about the American diffusion. Okay, so Clark Whistler says while studying American diffusion, he talks about the food areas and corresponding culture areas. Remember these facts for your examination. He says that culture elements get invented at a point where you see all cultural traits appearing, greatest concentration of trait. This is where culture gets invented. Socio-economic, political, religious activities are controlled at this. From here, diffusion occurs. And as diffusion occurs, it undergoes dilution. Okay, so this is what he says. Kroeber made a little bit change in his approach towards understanding diffusion. Instead of saying that culture gets invented at one place and spreads, he rather says that culture gets accumulated at one place and reaches its highest level. That point where culture reaches its highest level is called as culture climax. So the culture climax is a place where highest level of cultural development takes place, and this happens because of borrowing. Now, Kroeber's idea is very important because later it leads to the development of civilization school of thought. Even though that's not there in your syllabus, civilization school and great and little tradition is studied in paper 2. So this has its origin in Kroeber's diffusion theory. So Kroeber says that cultural elements are borrowed, it accumulates at one place called as the culture climax, where it reaches its highest level. Later, Robert Redfield calls this highest level or culture climax as great tradition. So borrowing from little tradition, reaching the highest level, the great tradition. And Robert Redfield, remember, he says that civilization is a combination of great and little tradition. Civilization comes into existence when great tradition comes into existence. So that idea is borrowed from diffusion. So culture climax is a place where culture reaches its highest level due to borrowing. Okay, so that is Alfred Kroeber. So he is talking about the rise and fall of civilization, etc. So this is something which Kroeber and Whistler. So both are talking about culture area, but Whistler is telling that it is culture center, whereas Kroeber is saying it is culture climax. So this is about American diffusion. Again, it has been criticized as being very vague, too much emphasis on culture climax or culture center. Why not culture be invented in other places other than culture center? They could not explain. Then diffusion, again, they say that it happens in all direction, but it does not happen. So they could not explain why culture element gets accepted or rejected. Quite narrow in focus because they focus only on food and other smaller elements. Complex cultural traits could not be explained by using this. They had given a concept called as age area that also has been criticized because communication and technology can lead to increase in the spread of culture at one place, while there is poor communication or there is some barrier to movement, then culture does not spread as fast. So age area also has been criticized by them, by others, with respect to American diffusion. So these are the three schools of diffusion: British, German, and American diffusion. Very briefly, I've just mentioned the important facts that you have to remember and write in your answers. Okay, in the next video, we'll take up the next theorist and try and understand that. Okay, I hope this is useful. Thank you for watching.